She looked breathtaking that night. Not because she loved me, but because she looked like someone who knew she'd won. The lights in the chandeliers painted her skin in gold and champagne hues, her diamond earrings catching the reflections of every flash that went off around us. People clapped, smiled, whispered blessings, and yet all I could hear was the sound of my own breathing. Slow, shallow, uncertain. I had never been the loud one in the room. Silence was my armor, my language, the only thing that ever felt safe. But as she stood beside me, her fingers resting lightly in my palm like something borrowed, I realized silence can be both shield and sword. It can protect, but it can also cut too deep. When she said, "I do," her voice didn't tremble. Mine did, maybe because mine carried the weight of something real, while hers carried the ease of a promise rehearsed. I caught her eyes for a moment. They didn't soften. They studied. They measured. It wasn't love that gleamed there. It was calculation. She had chosen me not because she wanted me, but because she wanted what came with me, the name, the quiet respect, the social air of security. I was a title, not a person, a destination, not a partner. And yet, standing there, with petals falling like slow snow from the ceiling, I convinced myself that maybe love could still grow from convenience. Maybe silence could still build a home. The guests cheered. My mother wiped a tear. Her father looked satisfied. The cameras caught every smile, except the truth hiding behind them. The band began to play something soft. I think it was a waltz, but it sounded distant, almost hollow. I remember trying to meet her gaze again as we took our first dance, but she avoided it. Her focus was on the people watching, not the man holding her. Every step we took felt choreographed for the world, not for us. Her laugh was perfectly timed, her smile perfectly shaped. She was performing her new role beautifully. I, on the other hand, was trying to feel something, anything beyond a numbness that had started to crawl through me. Later that night, when the crowd faded and the music died, the silence returned. It was just the two of us in the hotel suite, the beginning of what was supposed to be forever. She stood by the window, her veil removed, her posture elegant, unbothered. The city lights shimmered below, and I thought maybe, just maybe, we could talk. I wanted to ask her if she was happy, if she was scared, if she even wanted to know me beyond what she'd heard. But the words stayed in my throat, heavy and dry. I had never been good with them. I had always believed that love could exist quietly, in gestures, in presence, in peace. She, however, needed sound validation, compliments, attention, and when she didn't hear them, she mistook my silence for absence. She finally turned to me. "You really don't talk much, do you?" she said, with a hint of irritation masked as curiosity. I smiled, faintly. "I talk when it matters," I replied. She exhaled, a quiet scoff. "And when does it ever matter to you?" That question, simple, sharp, stayed with me longer than any vow that night. I didn't know how to answer it, because maybe she was right. Maybe I had lived too long in quiet corners, mistaking calm for connection. But that was me, a man who felt deeply but spoke rarely. A man who loved not through words but through loyalty. She walked past me, the scent of her perfume lingering like a memory I'd never owned. "You'll have to get used to being seen," she said before entering the adjoining room. In my world, silence is weakness. And just like that, the door closed between us. Not loudly, but with a softness that hurt more. I stood there for a long time, still in my wedding suit, looking at the reflection of the bed in the mirror. 2 glasses of champagne sat untouched. The petals on the floor looked like tiny ghosts of something that could have been beautiful. The city outside kept glowing, unaware that inside this golden room, 2 people had just signed a lifetime they didn't understand. And in that moment, I realized something. Silence, once my safest place, was about to become my biggest punishment. Because loving someone who hates your quiet isn't just hard. It's like drowning slowly in your own peace. The first few months of our marriage looked perfect from the outside. We smiled in photographs, attended charity galas, hosted dinners where laughter filled the air like perfume. People envied us. They said we were the picture of elegance, a calm, composed husband and a graceful wife. But what they didn't see was a quiet war between us. The one fought in the pauses between our sentences, in the way she sighed when I didn't respond fast enough, or the way I looked away when her laughter felt forced. We lived in the same house, slept in the same bed, but our worlds never truly met. She wanted a story to show the world. I wanted a home where silence didn't feel like shame. Mornings were polite. She liked her coffee sweet with almond milk and 2 cubes of sugar. I liked mine black, untouched. She would hum along to soft pop songs as she scrolled through her phone, checking the latest social updates, smiling at comments that praise her beauty, her charm, her life. I'd watch quietly from across the table, the newspaper open but unread. Every time I tried to speak, to ask her something simple, like how she slept or what she planned for the day, her answers were short, distracted, as if she were somewhere else entirely. Eventually, I stopped trying. Silence filled the space again, and she began to hate it even more. She started spending longer hours outside, luncheons, photo shoots, charity meetings. She returned smelling like luxury and exhaustion. When she entered the house, it was always bright, lights on, music playing, as if she was trying to drown out the quiet that I naturally brought with me. "You make this place feel like a library," she told me once, throwing her purse on the couch, her tone half joking, half resentful. "Do you ever get tired of being so quiet?" I wanted to tell her that silence, for me, was not emptiness. It was peace. It was where I felt things most deeply. But I stayed still, offering only a faint smile that she mistook for indifference. At night, I'd hear her talking on the phone, soft laughter, animated tones, the version of her the world adored. But that voice never belonged to me. With me, she was composed, cold, restrained, as if my stillness infected her. I once caught her standing in front of the mirror, whispering to her reflection, "I can't breathe in this quiet." And maybe she was right. Maybe my peace felt like a prison to someone who had only ever lived through noise. But what she didn't understand was that my silence wasn't a wall. It was a doorway. She just never tried to walk through it. I tried changing once. I started speaking more. Small talk, compliments, anything to fill the gap between us. I told her she looked beautiful one evening, before we went to party. She looked surprised, almost suspicious, then smiled faintly. "Trying to be someone else," she said. Her words stung, but I laughed it off. During that event, she glowed, her laughter magnetic, her charm effortless. People swarmed her, drawn to her like moths to a flame. I stood nearby, smiling politely, playing my part. Every now and then, she would glance my way, not with affection, but with irritation. My quiet presence seemed to dim her shine, as if my stillness threatened the image she was building. That night, she didn't speak to me on the drive home. The distance between us became a rhythm, a slow, silent heartbeat of something dying quietly. We stopped having dinner together. She ate late, after her calls, after her world had already consumed her for the day. I'd sit by the balcony, watching the city lights flicker below, 1,000 glowing lives, each with their own noise, their own meaning. Sometimes I wonder if I was wrong, if love really required words, constant affirmation, endless noise. But then I'd remember my parents, 2 souls who barely spoke, but always understood. Maybe I had inherited that kind of love, the kind that existed in glances, gestures, silence. But she wasn't built for that. She needed applause, not quiet understanding. One night, I found her crying quietly in the dark corner of our room. It was the first time I'd seen her look small. Her voice trembled when she said, "You don't even fight for me?" That broke something inside me. Because she was right, I didn't fight. Not because I didn't care, but because I believed that love shouldn't need to be a battlefield. I reached out, wanting to hold her, but she turned away. "You make me feel invisible," she whispered. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was cruelly ironic. She had married me for how visible I was to the world. Yet now, in our quiet house, I had become the ghost haunting her success. That night, I realized love dies not only from betrayal or lies. Sometimes it dies in silence, when 2 people speak different emotional languages. Hers was loud and radiant. Mine was soft and wordless. And in trying to love her quietly, I had accidentally made her feel unheard. There's a kind of silence that doesn't calm you anymore. It presses down, fills the room like fog, thick and suffocating. That was the silence between us now. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. You could feel it in the way she avoided eye contact, in how her phone became her lifeline, in the way she smiled more at screens than at me. Some nights, I'd catch her scrolling through photos of her friends, parties, events, her laughter echoing from videos that didn't include me. I'd be sitting just a few feet away, watching her face glow in the dim light of her phone. We were two people living in the same home, yet orbiting around different suns. One evening, she came home later than usual. The scent of wine and someone else's laughter clung to her clothes. I didn't ask where she'd been. I'd stopped asking questions whose answers were already written between the lines. She looked at me with tired eyes and said, "You could have called, you know." I smiled faintly. "You didn't pick up the last few times I did." She didn't respond. She just sighed, brushed past me, and disappeared into the bedroom. I stood there, staring at the half-empty glass she'd left on the counter. It wasn't anger I felt. It was something quieter, sadder. The realization that she had started finding her comfort elsewhere, in conversations I wasn't a part of. Days turned into a blur of routine. Breakfast without conversation. Evenings without warmth. She began to talk more about them. Her world, her circle, her admirers. I became a shadow in the backdrop of her social life. Sometimes she'd mention a man named Ryan, casually, like he was a harmless friend from an event. "He's funny," she'd say. "You'd actually like him." And maybe I would have, if I wasn't already watching him replace the spaces I used to fill. I never confronted her. What could I say? That her laughter sounded different now? That her eyes lit up when she read his messages? That she smiled more to her phone than to me? Words wouldn't have changed what was already slipping away. One night, I came home early from work. The house was quiet, too quiet. Her shoes were by the door, but the lights were off. I found her on the balcony, wrapped in a shawl, staring at the city. Her phone buzzed beside her. She picked it up immediately, smiling faintly, typing something quickly before noticing me. "You're home early," she said, her tone neutral. I nodded. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The wind moved softly through the curtains, carrying the distant hum of traffic. "You ever miss the quiet?" I asked finally. She looked at me, confused. "What quiet?" she replied. I wanted to tell her, the kind we used to have, before the noise of everything else. But I just shook my head. "Never mind." She went back to her phone. That night, I lay beside her, wide awake, listening to her breathing. There was a time when that sound comforted me, proof that someone was there, that I wasn't alone. But now, even that rhythm felt distant. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. I was afraid she'd pull it away. I was afraid of confirming what I already knew. She was still here physically, but her heart had already packed its bags. My silence, the thing that once made me who I was, had become the reason she stopped seeing me at all. And yet, I couldn't be someone else. Pretending to be louder, more expressive, it wasn't me. I was built for quiet things. Slow mornings, soft glances, love that didn't demand performance. But she needed applause, attention, energy, and I was a whisper trying to love a thunderstorm. Weeks passed. One afternoon, I came across a photo online. Her at a rooftop event. Ryan standing close beside her. The caption read, "Two souls who understand each other without words." That line, it shattered me, because it was everything I had believed about us once. But with her, it had never been true. She never understood silence. Not mine, not anyone's. She only understood echoes of admiration. I didn't confront her. I didn't ask. What would confrontation achieve when love had already turned into a transaction of appearances? I simply closed my laptop, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the floor until the room blurred. That evening, she came home smiling, radiant from whatever world she had been in. She told me about the event, about Ryan, about how everyone finally saw her for who she really was. I nodded. "And who is that?" I asked softly. She paused, taken aback by the question. "Someone alive," she whispered. Then she looked at me with eyes that weren't cruel, just tired. You make everything so quiet, it feels like I'm disappearing. I didn't reply, because in that moment, I realized she wasn't wrong. I had built my life around peace, but she mistook it for emptiness. I offered stability. She craved fire. I gave her silence. She wanted songs. We weren't enemies, just two people built for different weather. And when you love someone who belongs to another season, you either watch them fade or you learn to let them go. That night, I stayed on the balcony until dawn. The city looked alive, golden, endless. Inside, she slept soundly, the faint light of her phone still glowing on the bedside table. Messages from a world she belonged to, one that no longer included me. For the first time, I whispered something into the quiet. Maybe you were never meant to love silence. The wind carried my words away, soft, unseen, unheard. Just like me, it happened on a Sunday, one of those rare days when neither of us had anywhere to be. The sky outside was gray, the kind of weather that invites honesty. I was making tea in the kitchen. The sound of boiling water, the only thing filling the space between us. She sat on the couch, scrolling again, her laughter short and sharp at something I couldn't see. For a moment, I thought about walking over, sitting beside her, asking about her day. But the moment passed. She looked up suddenly and said, "Do you ever get tired of pretending we're fine?" Her voice wasn't cruel, just exhausted. I turned off the kettle, the whistle fading into silence. "I don't pretend," I said quietly. "Maybe that's the problem," she replied. We'd avoided open conflict for months, building walls with politeness, hiding wounds behind careful smiles. But that day, the mask slipped. "You don't talk, you don't share, you don't even feel," she said, her voice trembling. "Do you even care that I'm slipping away from you?" I looked at her, the woman who once stood beside me in white and promised forever, and I saw a stranger who didn't want quiet. She wanted an echo. "Caring isn't always loud," I said softly. She shook her head, tears glistening. "Then I can't hear it." Something broke in me. I set the teacup down too hard. Porcelain cracked against marble. "You think I don't feel?" I said, my voice rising for the first time in months. The sound startled even me. "You think silence means emptiness?" Every night, I hear the space between your words and mine. Every morning, I wait for you to look at me the way you look at your phone. You want proof? You want noise? Fine, here it is. She stared, stunned. "Where was this energy before?" She whispered. "Why do you only speak when it's too late?" The argument spiraled. Soft words turned sharp. Old wounds reopened. She accused me of indifference. I accused her of performance. She said she felt unseen. I said she never tried to look. Somewhere in the middle, love got lost. The quiet house that had once held our unspoken tenderness now echoed with everything we'd been saving up. And the strange thing was, the noise didn't fix us. It just made the distance visible. After she stormed off, I sat alone on the floor beside the cracked teacup. The steam had vanished. The silence that returned wasn't the gentle kind I used to cherish. It was bitter now, burnt, bruised. I realized how fragile love becomes when one heart speaks in whispers and the other in thunder. We had both been waiting to be understood, but neither had learned the other's language. That evening, she didn't come home until late. When she finally walked in, she looked composed again. Makeup fixed, posture perfect. The only thing that betrayed her was a redness around her eyes. "I needed air," she said simply. I nodded. I didn't ask where she'd gone, though part of me already knew. She sat across from me, silence stretching again. Then, almost tenderly, she said, "You know what hurts the most? You never fight for me until you're about to lose me." I wanted to tell her that I had been fighting all along, just quietly, internally, holding on through the stillness. But she wouldn't have understood. So I just said, "Maybe I didn't know I was losing you." She looked at me for a long time, eyes soft but far away. "You did," she whispered. "You just didn't make a sound." That night, she packed a small suitcase. Not to leave permanently, not yet, but enough to make her absence felt. She said she needed space. I didn't try to stop her. Maybe because I was too tired, or maybe because I knew that if love has to be begged for, it's already halfway gone. When the door closed behind her, the house felt larger than it ever had. I walked into the bedroom. Her perfume still lingered, her scarf draped over the chair. The air smelled like memory, warm, expensive, fading. I sat by the window until morning. The city outside glimmered faintly, indifferent. I thought about calling her, apologizing, promising to change, but I knew that even if she came back, the silence would too. Some things can't be repaired with noise. They need understanding. And that was the one thing we never learned. When dawn broke, light spilled across the floor, touching the empty space where she stood the day we married. For the first time, I admitted to myself that she didn't hate me. She hated the version of love I offered. And maybe that was enough reason to let her go. The first few days after she left felt strange, like living in a museum of our life together. Everything was still there. Her perfume on the dresser, her lipstick by the sink, her favorite mug beside mine. Yet the air had changed. It no longer moved the same way. The house breathed differently without her. The silence that once felt sacred now felt haunted. I'd catch myself listening for footsteps that never came, glancing at the door every time the wind made it creak. It's strange how you start noticing the absence of small sounds, the rustle of a dress, the closing of a drawer, even the sigh of someone brushing their hair. That's how you know someone mattered. When even their quiet becomes loud once they're gone. She called once, not talked, just to say she was doing okay. I could hear the city behind her. Traffic, laughter, life. It made my voice sound smaller when I replied, "I'm glad." She said she was staying with a friend for a while. Layla, someone I vaguely remember from her parties. I didn't ask questions. Maybe I was afraid of the answers. Maybe I already knew Ryan's name would appear somewhere between those silences. Still, when the call ended, I stayed on the line for a moment longer, as if I could keep her there by not hanging up. Days turned into weeks. I filled the time with work, routines, the illusion of purpose. But at night, everything came undone. I'd walk past her side of the bed and feel the weight of the empty space like a presence. Her absence had shape, texture, even sound. It echoed in the quiet of the walls. One night, I found myself sitting on the balcony, the same one where she once told me she felt invisible. I finally understood what she meant. You can live next to someone, sleep beside them, share air and space, and still vanish in their silence. I started writing again. Not letters, just words. Pages filled with everything I never said. The apologies I didn't make, the admiration I never voiced, the questions I was too quiet to ask. It wasn't meant for her. It was meant for me. A way of translating the silence that had destroyed us. I realized I had mistaken restraint for strength, thinking that being calm meant being enough. But love sometimes needs to be seen, not performed, just acknowledged. She needed to be reminded that she mattered out loud, and I failed to do that. Then one afternoon, I saw her again, not in person, but in a photo online. She was at a rooftop dinner, laughing. Her eyes glowed with the kind of ease I hadn't seen in months. Beside her was Ryan. He was holding a glass of champagne, leaning close, saying something that made her smile, that same real, bright smile I used to see when she first believed in us. For a moment, my chest tightened. Not from jealousy, but from recognition. That was the version of her that had been dying in our quiet home. She hadn't stopped needing love. She just stopped finding it in me. That night, I poured myself a drink and sat on the floor beside our wedding photo. We looked beautiful there, framed forever in a moment that no longer existed. I remembered how I had promised her stability, how she had promised me forever. Neither of us knew that promises don't survive when the languages of love don't match. I whispered to the photo, "I hope he speaks your language." It wasn't bitterness. It was a prayer, a quiet hope that maybe she'd find peace in the noise she needed. Weeks later, she came by to collect some of her things. It was the first time we'd seen each other since that morning she left. She looked different, calmer, lighter, as if some invisible burden had lifted. "You been okay?" she asked softly. I nodded. "You look free," I said. She smiled faintly. "I'm learning to breathe again." Then she paused. You should too. We stood there for a long time. Two people who once tried to build a forever out of mismatched silences. She touched the edge of the table, glanced around the room, and said, You kept everything the same. I didn't know what else to do. I replied. Her eyes softened, but her voice didn't tremble. Maybe change is the only way to save yourself. When she left again, she didn't say goodbye, just take care. I watched her walk to the car, the city lights catching in her hair. And for the first time, I didn't wait for her to turn around. I didn't hold on to the moment. I just stood there, letting the silence return, but this time, it didn't hurt the same way. It wasn't heavy. It was gentle, like something that finally understood its own shape. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't write. I didn't even replay her words. I simply sat by the window, letting the wind move through the curtains, the world humming quietly outside. For the first time, my silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like peace, not the kind you share, but the kind you reclaim. The days that followed her final goodbye were strangely calm, like the silence after a storm that had torn through every wall but spared the foundation. The house still stood, but it wasn't the same. I wasn't the same. I started noticing how light moved through the rooms differently now, softer in the mornings, warmer at dusk. The echoes that once hurt had softened into something almost kind. Maybe grief doesn't vanish. Maybe it just learns to whisper instead of scream. For the first time in months, I let myself breathe without waiting for someone to fill the air beside me. Every morning, I opened the windows wide and made coffee for one. The bitterness didn't sting anymore. It tasted honest. I began reading again, old books, half-finished journals, notes I'd abandoned during the noise of our marriage. Somewhere between those pages, I started finding pieces of myself I'd forgotten. The boy who loved quiet corners, the man who found comfort in simplicity. I realized that I had spent so long trying to make my silence fit into her world that I'd forgotten it was never meant to perform. Silence, for me, had always been sacred, a space to feel, to think, to be. She mistook it for emptiness, but it was never empty. It was where I kept everything too fragile to say out loud. I stopped checking her photos, not because I stopped caring, but because I didn't need to measure her happiness anymore. Maybe that's what healing is, not forgetting, but releasing the need to be remembered. She was out there, living louder, brighter, freer, and I was here, learning to quiet our stillness again. Our paths had diverged not because one was better, but because they couldn't run parallel forever. Sometimes at night, I'd still think about her laugh, the way it filled a room like light. I'd remember her perfume, her voice, her questions that cut to me like glass. But instead of pain, what I felt now was gratitude. She taught me something no peace ever could. That even silence needs to be understood, that love isn't just presence but translation. We failed not because we didn't care, but because we didn't speak the same emotional dialect. She spoke in rhythm. I spoke in pause. We mistook difference for distance, and that's how love unraveled. One evening, I visited the old cafe we used to pass by, but never entered. It was small, warm, tucked between two bookstores, the kind of place made for people who love quiet. I sat by the window, ordered tea, and watched the world go by. There was a couple at the next table, laughing, arguing playfully, alive in all the ways we never were. I didn't envy them. I just observed. For the first time, I wasn't longing for what I lost. I was simply present, inside my own moment, breathing without weight. The waiter asked if I wanted another cup. I said yes. Maybe that's when it hit me. Healing isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It just happens quietly, like a sunrise you don't notice until the room fills with light. I didn't realize how far I'd come until I caught myself humming, softly, unconsciously, while stirring my tea. There was peace again, real peace, the kind that doesn't depend on who stays or leaves. On the way home, I walked slower. The city didn't feel as loud anymore. Maybe it had never been. Maybe I had just learned how to listen differently. The same streets that once reminded me of her now looked new, alive with other stories I need to be part of. I passed by a flower shop. The scent of lilies drifted through the air. She used to love lilies. For a brief second, I almost walked in to buy some, out of habit, not hope, but then I smiled and kept walking. Some gestures don't need repeating once you understand their purpose. That night, I wrote something simple in my journal. She taught me to love, and silence taught me to stay. I closed the notebook and left it on the table, not as a letter to her, but as a promise to myself. A promise that next time, if love finds me again, I'll speak when it matters. Not louder, just clearer. Not out of fear of losing someone, but out of love for the moment itself. When I went to bed, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt alive, with memories, with lessons, with breath. I turned off the lamp, listened to the faint hum of the night outside, and smiled. The silence that once felt like punishment had become my companion again. Not because I was lonely, but because I had finally learned to hear it as something kind.